Hello and welcome to the another session of this course, Marketing Management 1. We are going into this second module of this course, which is on business strategy, which is on business environment and strategy, which are commonly used by a marketer to analyze the factors that affects their organization and how basically they are accounted to formulate the marketing strategies. This is part of overall situational analysis. The two important tools we are going to talk about is, the first one is PESTEL Framework. So we say broadly there are certain macro environmental factors that affects the organization. This framework is very commonly abbreviated as PESTEL, PESTEL. So P stands for political, E stands for economic, S stands for social, T stands for technological factors, the second E stands for the environment, and the last L stands for the legal. So these are basically 6 important factors. The changes across these factors influence the way probably a company does a business, the profitability are probably the financial parameters of the factors, financial parameters of a company. So I am going to take you through with each one of these factors, what are the things that inside these factors affects an organization that needs to be considered. So the first one is basically the political factors. As you can see, I have listed out here that government policy regulations, they are some of the very important concerns for any of the business organization, for any company to operate in any market. These are the factors that affects them in a quite a big manner. So if there are changes or there are changes in the regulations, for example, recently Government of India has come out the changes in the employee provident fund organizations regulation, where probably this 5% of that overall corpus can be invested in the equity market. So that has given a huge opportunity to all these mutual funds to probably come out with a scheme and that take a part of that big pie of that emerging market. So this is one example where the political changes or the changes in the regulation and policy has affected or probably created some sort of market and the opportunity for the organizations. Also there are political factors like the prominent ideologies which are present in any society, political ideologies. So there are some political organizations which are seen as pro business, there are some organizations which basically see business as their adversaries, are probably not so good for the society. So all those basically things affects the company or probably the business environment in which a company operates, because depending on the which kind of political organization is in power, that will also affect their ideology, is going to affect the kind of policy they are going to frame, which are going to affect all the organizations. Another thing which comes into this political factor is the political stability. So how much is this political stability exist in a market will affect basically broadly the kind of investment that will come into that market. All those things will basically affect probably how a company is basically going to get invested in a particular market and how it is going to expand or how it is going to operate. So this is the first factor which I have talked about, the political factor. The second important factor that affects a business organization is the economic factors. So inside these economic factors we can see we have physical policy, monetary policy, exchange rate, changes in the production and the labor markets, income, GDP, inflation, growth rate, economic cycle and unemployment rate. all these factors are going to affect the overall business environment. So you see, when probably interest rate is on the lower side and the inflation rate is on a higher side, that means a person will find out there are not much of the benefit investing into the fixed deposit, and in that point of time, considering the devaluation of the money, the rate of which with which probably the money is going through this erosion in its value, probably a person will like to invest more into the mutual funds or probably equity markets. So you see how basically these economic factors affects the way that a consumer behaves. So in turn, that will basically bring in the opportunities for some organization or probably some kind of product, and also probably the challenges for some kind of products. Like I just talked about, probably it's an opportunity for products like equity based product or probably mutual fund related product. On the other side, it will be this kind of changes will probably be a challenge for retaining the customers or probably getting the investment into the fixed deposit at any particular point of time, if the inflation rate is high and the interest rates are on the lower side. So the next factor which I am going to talk about is the social factors. This is another very important factor that probably a marketeer needs to understand. Is inside it is the demographic trends, like what is the birth rate, what is the mortality rate, what is basically the gender ratio with male and female. So a lot of these kind of factors will affect the way probably the market demand are, and the way the market demands are moving up in the are going to move up in the future. So that will basically decide what kind of that will shape up the company offerings. Then you have security, peace and internal law and order. These are some of the very important things. You can see the effect of security, peace, internal law and order. Some of these have a very far reaching implication in the travel and tourism industry. So places which are not perceived as a secure place, which have law and order problem, there will be the tourist intention or travel to those places will be far less than to places probably which are perceived as a very peaceful and then good security for anyone who wants to travel from outside. Then what are basically the different activist group, what are the different pressure groups, how they operate in a society, all those things are going to come up inside these social factors, and that is going to affect the business environment. The fourth factor is basically this technological factors. Inside technological factors, one of the very important thing that comes inside this factor is the way probably with the rate at which the technologies are changing, or the rate of technological development. That is something which is very important in today's world, because rate of technological development can make certain industry to just pop up in no time, and on the other side you will see there will be some incumbent firms, there will be certain existing industries which will just go out of the time. If you map the industry, certain industry in this memory devices over the period of last one and a half decade, you will find out there were different forms of the product that came and went out of the market. So you have the floppy disk, you have the CDs, then you have pen drive, and people today are using basically this virtual spaces for having the memory. So you will see that this changes in the technology, the way probably people are storing their data has changed over the period of time, and that has led to certain companies come as or probably emerge as a leader in the market. On the other side, when the technological changes happen at such a fast rate, you will also see that some of the industries have gone out of the market. So those are very important aspects of the technological change which affects the overall business environment. The next thing is inside this technological environment is how the basically the technologies are getting developed in the areas of new materials in the process, because what happens is a technological development in one industry or one type of material or process will probably create a, or probably will support a certain kind of or will make certain kind of product and process feasible which was not possible earlier. So it will certainly probably or suddenly probably develop a new type of industry. There is a basically development in information communication technology, the convergence in these industries which are basically affecting lot of industries and probably the way the business and distribution is happening in the market. Penetration of internet across the country is another factor that has affected lot of industries. Then we have environmental factors, how basically what are the impacts of the business on the basically this our nature. With every passing day across the globe you will see that the awareness is increasing and people are becoming more and more concerned about the business practices that affect the nature. So there are basically more we see in the coming time the more stringent regulations and the law coming up, and that will basically be enforced on these companies to be more responsible towards the environment in which we live. So from that point of view the companies or the organizations have to face these challenges wherein they probably have to be more responsible towards the nature also. The last factor, that legal environment where probably health and safety related issue comes into the picture, the equal opportunity, the biases towards the gender or probably race or any other kind of discrimination, all these challenges also have to be faced and the organizations have to be more justified in all their ways probably they do the business. So the way they conduct and their business ethics is going to be very important. Another thing that is going to affect in this legal factor is this IPR regime or the IPR intellectual property rights related issues, so that you as a business should not infringe into the others intellectual property rights. So being aware of all these factors is also important. So this is the PESTEL framework which talks about the overall business environment in which companies operate and how basically these 6 factors affect any company and its operations. So the next framework I am going to talk about is about internal analysis of the organization, which is called as SWOT analysis, or strength, weaknesses, opportunities and threat. Inside this analysis tool you will find out there are 4 factors that an organization or a company needs to be concerned about or they need to analyze about. The first one is the strength, the second one is basically its weaknesses, the third one is opportunities which are existing in front of that organization, and the threats, the kind of challenges it is going to face. So I have listed basically some type of strengths, sometimes some type of weaknesses, possible opportunities for some of the organization or in the some of the emerging markets or some of the kind of evolving markets, then certain kind of threats that are coming that are coming up in front of the organization because of the environmental factors that I have talked about. So if I talk about this kind of strength, certain organization, established organization which have a portfolio of strong brands, they will find out their brand image is one of their key strength. Another basically strength probably which probably organization which is a source of probably a long range competitive advantage, sustainable competitive advantage, is basically wide distribution network. So a major difference, one of the example possibly in India with respect to this wide distribution network is Hindustan Unilever Limited's distribution network vis-a-vis others distribution network. HUL has a very strong distribution network which is probably one of the key contributors to its success in the Indian market. Then the innovative products, the company's ability to bring out the innovative products in the market. Companies like Apple have the ability to come out with innovative products in time and again, and then that is probably one big strength with them. Then you have the companies which have lowest cost structure, so that gives them the opportunity to charge less or probably be more competitive in the market in terms of the prices, or if they are pricing at the level of the competition or probably with other competitors, their profit margin is going to be higher. Then motivated employees can also be a strength. You see in a lot of startups with small companies, they have a very good bunch of talented young engineers which are coming out with this motivated employees. Then you have certain type of weaknesses which we often see in the organizations. Lack of resources, probably that is very relevant with probably a sort of a startup firm which will have a scarcity of financial resources, and that will also create a sort of crunch for them in all getting or acquiring all sorts of other resources in the market. Then you have lack of innovation, another problem with a lot of organization, that their inability to come out with the new products or the new offering with the changing trends in the market. Geographical reach, which is coming out because of your limited distribution network or your ability to reach to only certain parts of the markets. Then higher cost structures because of different reasons, because of your legacy processes or the kind of technology which you are using in your processes, or your procurement process, your cost structure might be higher. And then also because of mature product lines, you have products in the later stages of product life cycle, and if you are unable to innovate, that is another sort of weaknesses. Then in terms of common opportunities which probably which are seen across the markets are the demographic trends which are showing that the market size is increasing, or probably within a certain size of the market, the demographic shift that is changing the way the markets are favorable to certain kind of products, and that kind of products might be favorable to certain companies. Then the social awareness about certain kind of product is increasing, like personal hygiene is something in India which where probably the social awareness has gone up, and that will certainly affect the consumption of a certain kind of personal hygiene related products. Then you have favorable policy and regulations. You look at basically certain changes in the policy and regulations, where probably particularly it is if I give you an example of the oil and probably this refining business, where probably our exploration of oil business, where the companies have to face lot of basically regulations, and they have to be more responsible with the way probably they do the cracking and all those process, or probably the exploration is happening. So they have to face and they have to abide by a lot more stringent regulations, and in that case that basically will create the need of certain type of products for them to use, and that will probably create the market or probably opportunities for certain type of products. Then you have common threats which are seen is changes in the regulation and the laws, which will probably make certain type of products obsolete, because if they have a negative impact on the environment or the society, the government may come out with a regulation or probably prohibit the use of certain kind of technology and products. Changes in the tax structure, so that can also favor certain kind of industry and or certain kind of business model. On the other side, certain business model may find difficult to operate with the changing tax regime. Then you have entry of foreign or local players into the market. So if the foreign players enters into the market, they comes with a certain type of resources, they will have knowledge and a strong R&D of different markets, they have financial resources, and with that probably they can compete very hard with the existing players. On the other side, if the local player comes, since they have a better knowledge about the culture of the local needs, so they can come out or probably they can design the product distribution network which might favor them, or it could also be because of the local sentiments which will probably favor the local players. So This is basically the summary of strength, weakness, opportunities and threats. Now if you see how this framework is used, is that your strength can be applied to exploit the opportunities which are emerging in the market, and your weaknesses will be the limitations, as it is shown that the weaknesses will probably create a sort of limitations to exploit the opportunities in the market, and you will see that your weaknesses will become your challenges or a sort of threats in the market. And another thing which is very important is sometimes your strength becomes your rigidities, and that creates the threat for certain incumbent organizations. Like if you are invested in a certain type of technologies or certain type of products, so you would like to first mint, or probably you would like to cultivate your investment in that particular market. However, the technological if you remain invested in the phase of the technological changes, you may probably find yourself to be going out of the market because of the new forms of the product, or the changes in the technology will be more favorable to the changing environment, the changing business environment. So this is what probably the use of the SWOT is. So what I suggest to you is that you take certain organizations example from India and try to apply some of these concepts or tools in the context of those organizations, and then probably you will be able to understand the utility of these tools and the concepts. And with this I will finish this, or probably I will conclude this session. See you in the next session. Thank you.